There is a particular kind of loneliness that can exist even in a room filled with people who share your blood. It is not always the loneliness of being unloved, rejected, or abandoned. Sometimes you were loved sincerely, included fully, and given a place within the family. Yet some part of you continued to wonder why the people closest to you seemed to organize reality so differently than you did. They valued things you could not make yourself value, accepted assumptions that never settled comfortably inside you, or moved through emotional patterns you recognized without ever experiencing them as your own. And because family is often the first mirror through which a human being learns who they are, the absence of resemblance can quietly become a question about whether you belong at all. This is where belonging and sameness are easily confused. A child usually does not have language sophisticated enough to separate the two. So belonging is first experienced through resemblance. We laugh at the same things, believe the same things, behave in familiar ways, and understand one another without requiring much translation. When those similarities are present, belonging can feel effortless because very little friction exists between the individual and the surrounding pattern. But when they are absent, the person may spend years attempting to manufacture resemblance in order to secure belonging. They learn which parts of themselves make sense to the family, which parts create tension, which questions are welcome, which questions disturb the room, and eventually they may become skilled at appearing more similar than they actually feel. This does not require an abusive family or an oppressive culture. It can happen among kind people whose ways of living simply do not reflect what is emerging through one of their own. A practical family can produce a deeply contemplative child. A highly expressive family can receive someone inward and private. A family organized around achievement can receive someone whose consciousness keeps asking what achievement is for. The mismatch may concern religion, ambition, emotional intimacy, gender, expectations, relationships, money, creativity, spirituality, duty, or the basic meaning of a good life. None of these differences automatically make one side more developed than the other. They simply create a condition in which identity cannot be formed entirely through imitation. And that condition matters more than it first appears. When the surrounding environment does not provide a ready made reflection of what you are becoming, you are required to participate more consciously in discovering it. You cannot rely as heavily upon inherited answers because some of those answers do not resolve the questions arising within you. You cannot simply become what everyone around you already recognizes, because recognition may arrive only after you have learned to recognize yourself. What initially feels like the absence of a mirror can therefore become the development of an inner capacity, the ability to distinguish what is genuinely yours from what has merely been near you for a long time. This is one reason contrast can perform work that resemblance cannot. Resemblance confirms, contrast differentiates. When you encounter something that feels deeply unlike you, the experience does not only tell you something about the other person, it reveals the contours of your own orientation. You may not know how important emotional openness is to you until you grow within an environment where emotion is rarely spoken. You may not recognize your need for intellectual freedom until certain questions are discouraged, or your relationship with tenderness until you live among people who express care primarily through responsibility rather than words. The contrast does not create every quality it reveals, but neither is it merely an obstacle standing in the way of those qualities. Sometimes resistance provides the pressure through which a vague inclination becomes a conscious value. It is one thing to prefer kindness when kindness surrounds you, and another to discover that you intend to remain kind when harshness would make harshness easier. It is one thing to inherit curiosity, and another to preserve curiosity in an environment where certainty is rewarded. Under those conditions, a quality stops being only temperament and begins becoming choice. What you carry becomes more distinctly yours because you have encountered the possibility of becoming otherwise. This does not mean difficulty should be romanticized. A painful childhood does not become harmless because something valuable eventually emerged from it, and a destructive family pattern does not need to be renamed a blessing in order for consciousness to learn through its presence. There are experiences that wound, relationships that require distance, and inheritances whose healthiest continuation is their refusal. Purpose is not the same thing as approval. To say that consciousness can make use of contrast is not to say that every harmful action was secretly correct, necessary, or consciously arranged by everyone involved. That distinction becomes essential whenever incarnation is discussed as purposeful. Purposeful placement does not require every event within that placement to have been individually scripted before Earth. Entering a lineage can establish conditions, probabilities, relationships, inheritances, and tensions without reducing every human choice inside those conditions to predetermined choreography. Your family members remain people, not actors assigned to perform your curriculum correctly. They improvise, misunderstand, mature, regress, love imperfectly, make choices, and create consequences that become part of the environment everyone else must then respond to. So the meaning of a lineage cannot be reduced to the claim that you selected a collection of people who would behave exactly as required. The deeper possibility is that you entered a living field whose complexity cannot be separated from the freedom of those participating in it. You inherited what generations before you had already made available, but you also encountered what the people living beside you would create while you were here. Some of that became nourishment. Some became friction. Some became material you would spend half a lifetime sorting, before realizing that sorting it was itself one of the ways your individuality became more precise. This changes the question of inheritance. We often imagine inheritance as something transmitted downward: facial features, genetic tendencies, customs, stories, fears, resources, wounds, languages, beliefs, and habits moving from ancestors into descendants. But a living lineage does not only transmit backward material forward. Every person who enters it also changes what the lineage becomes capable of transmitting next. You are therefore not merely the recipient of your ancestry. Through what you preserve, interpret, reinterpret, heal, refuse, and introduce, you become part of the ancestry encountered by those who come after you. A person who does not resemble the dominant family pattern may be especially visible at this threshold. Perhaps everyone before them learned that conflict should be avoided, and they become the first person willing to remain present during disagreement without disappearing or attacking. Perhaps achievement has been the family's primary language of worth, and they begin separating human value from productivity. Perhaps silence protected previous generations because speaking carried consequences that no longer exist. Yet the protective silence continues long after the original danger has passed. The descendant who begins speaking is not necessarily rejecting those who survived remaining quiet. They may be carrying the survival those ancestors made possible into a condition where survival can finally become something more. Seen this way, transformation does not require contempt for what came before. In fact, contempt can prevent transformation by keeping a person psychologically bound to the very pattern they believe they have escaped. If your identity depends upon never being like your family still occupies the center of your identity. Your choices remain organized in relation to theirs, only inverted. Freedom becomes deeper when you can see what a pattern accomplished, understand why it may have existed, recognize where it no longer serves, and choose differently without requiring the people who carried it to become inferior in your story. This is recognition without superiority. You can be the unusual person in your family without being the secretly elevated person in your family. You can question what others accept without assuming their acceptance proves unconsciousness. You can feel drawn toward realities, ideas, or forms of experience that nobody around you understands without converting that difference into evidence that you are more advanced than they are. Difference tells you that two expressions are different. The hierarchy placed between them is usually something consciousness adds afterward. This becomes particularly important when a person begins interpreting their difference metaphysically. There are people who experience powerful resonance with cultures, eras, worlds, symbolic systems, or forms of consciousness that do not seem easily explained by their immediate environment. Within the Vaharet understanding, an oversoul is not limited to expressing through one human family, one cultural stream, or one narrow range of incarnation. So it is reasonable within this framework that a person may carry resonances not obviously reflected by their present lineage. But resonance is not a certificate of origin, and alienation is not evidence of extraterrestrial identity. Feeling unlike your family may have many layers, and wisdom does not rush to turn the most extraordinary interpretation into the first explanation. Otherwise, an old human wound can simply acquire cosmic language. The child who once thought, "Nobody here understands me," becomes the adult who concludes, "That is because I was never really one of them." The explanation may feel expansive while quietly preserving the original separation intact. Earth becomes somewhere beneath them. Family becomes an accidental container, and ordinary human belonging becomes something they imagine they will eventually transcend. A teaching intended to enlarge identity then accomplishes the opposite. It gives the wound a universe large enough to hide inside. A wider identity should make the present incarnation more inhabitable, not less. If consciousness extends beyond one lifetime or lineage, that does not make this lifetime disposable. It makes this particular expression one relationship within something larger. If the Oversoul has known other environments, other embodiments, or other forms of relationship, then this family does not become a mistake simply because it cannot reflect all of them. No single lineage could contain the total history of a consciousness larger than one incarnation. Perhaps it was never supposed to. This allows a different relationship with the sentence, "These people are not like me." It may be true. They may genuinely not be like you in ways that have shaped your entire life, and maturity does not require pretending otherwise. But the next question is no longer then why was I placed here? It becomes, what did this particular difference require me to discover, develop, confront, or choose that effortless resemblance might never have asked of me? And even that question has to remain open long enough to surprise you, because the answer may not be only that your family taught you who you were by showing you what you were not. That would still make them little more than contrast arranged around your development. Over time, you may discover that the very people who could not mirror you also gave you forms of loyalty, humor, endurance, practical intelligence, contradiction, frustration, affection, responsibility, and love that entered your consciousness precisely because they were not constructed in your image. The lineage may have shaped you, not despite the mismatch, but through a relationship between difference and belonging that is more intricate than either resemblance or opposition can explain. Then another possibility begins to appear. Perhaps the question was never whether you could find yourself reflected perfectly in the people who received you. Perhaps the deepest question concerns whether you can remain distinctly yourself while allowing relationship with what is genuinely other. That is a much larger capacity than belonging through sameness, because it asks consciousness to remain differentiated without withdrawing and connected without disappearing. And once that possibility becomes visible, the family that seemed unable to explain who you are begins revealing a different function entirely. Because relationship with what is genuinely other asks something of consciousness that perfect reflection never can. When another person thinks as you think, values what you value, and responds as you respond, much of the relationship can move through recognition. But when someone you love remains meaningfully different from you, recognition is no longer enough. Understanding must become an active capacity. You have to learn where their experience begins without requiring it to become yours, and where your own experience remains valid without requiring their agreement. Difference stops being merely the distance between two people and becomes the place where a relationship itself must develop. This is often where the person who has felt unlike their family discovers that the task was never simply to escape the family pattern. Escape can sometimes be necessary as a practical act, especially where boundaries are repeatedly violated or harm continues. But psychological differentiation is more demanding than physical distance. You can leave a household and continue arguing with it internally for decades. You can reject every value you inherited and still organize your identity around proving those values wrong. The lineage continues governing you whenever your sense of self requires its opposition in order to remain coherent. True differentiation begins when you no longer need resemblance or rebellion to tell you who you are. You can stand near an inherited pattern and recognize it without automatically entering it. You can hear a family expectation without experiencing the expectation as a command, encounter a familiar emotional reaction without assuming you must reproduce it, and love someone whose worldview you cannot adopt. This is not detachment in the sense of becoming unaffected or indifferent. It is the development of enough interior distinction that contact no longer requires absorption. For many people, this is harder than simply leaving. Distance can make difference easy because the contrasting pattern is no longer constantly present, while relationship requires you to remain yourself in the presence of what once shaped you. The old family role may return the moment you walk through a familiar doorway. A capable adult can become strangely uncertain around a parent. A confident speaker can begin withholding opinions around siblings, and someone who has transformed their emotional life can feel an old reflex appearing during a 10-minute conversation. The body remembers relational positions long after the conscious mind has developed explanations for them. This is why lineage is not carried only through beliefs. It is carried through timing, posture, expectation, nervous system anticipation. What happens to your voice when someone is disappointed? How quickly you apologize? What kind of silence makes you anxious? And what you believe you must do when another person becomes uncomfortable. You may consciously reject an inherited worldview while continuing to perform its emotional architecture. You may tell yourself that you no longer need approval while organizing important decisions around avoiding a particular person's disapproval. The deepest inheritance is often not what you say you believe, but what your system learned relationship requires. Then contrast becomes more intimate than disagreement. It reveals the places where your emerging identity has become real and the places where it still depends upon favorable conditions. It is easy to believe you have become free of an old expectation when nobody is asking you to fulfill it. It is different to encounter that expectation again and discover that you can feel its emotional weight without surrendering your own direction. At that moment, difference is no longer merely something that happened between you and your lineage. It becomes a place where the distinction between inheritance and identity is made visible. This can change the meaning of the person who seems least like their family. They may not have arrived simply to demonstrate another way to everyone else, because that interpretation can quietly make their relatives into an audience for their development. The more difficult possibility is reciprocal. The lineage provides conditions through which this person becomes distinct, while this person's presence introduces a difference the lineage itself must now encounter. Neither side has to consciously understand that exchange for it to occur. A family changes simply because someone exists within it who cannot completely reproduce what was handed to them. Sometimes the change is obvious. A daughter refuses a marriage expectation. A son raises his children with an emotional openness he never received. Someone leaves the profession generations of relatives assume they would enter. Or one family member begins discussing something everyone else learned not to name. But often lineage transformation is much quieter. Someone learns to disagree without punishment, stops using shame as motivation, becomes the first to apologize to a child, allows rest without earning it, or decides that affection does not have to be hidden behind usefulness. These actions may appear small when viewed individually, yet lineage is built from repeated ordinary behaviors long before it becomes a story told about generations. And the person introducing the difference may never see its full consequence. Their parents may not change. Their siblings may misunderstand them. The family may continue regarding their choices as strange, unnecessary, or disappointing. And there may be no scene in which everyone finally acknowledges that the unusual person was carrying something valuable. Transformation does not require recognition from the system being transformed. Sometimes the evidence appears 2 generations later in a child who finds it ordinary to make a choice that once required enormous courage from someone whose name they barely know. This is one reason ancestry cannot be understood only by looking backward. You are standing inside a process whose future members do not yet exist, and some of what feels like personal difference now may eventually become ordinary inheritance. The permission you struggle to give yourself may become permission someone after you never has to struggle for. The conversation you are the first to initiate may become a conversation your descendants assume families have always been able to hold. What feels like isolation from the lineage in one generation can become an expansion of the lineage's available range in another. Yet even this should not become another burden placed upon the person who already feels different. You do not need to become the healer of your bloodline, the savior of your ancestors, or the one spiritually responsible for correcting generations of human complexity. Such identities can appear noble while recreating the same pressure in a more metaphysical form. They can turn every personal choice into ancestral labor and make rest feel like abandoning a mission. A lineage can be influenced through the simple integrity of living differently without requiring you to carry everyone who came before you upon your back. The Oversoul perspective becomes useful here only if it increases freedom rather than obligation. If consciousness can express through multiple lineages and many kinds of embodiment, then no single incarnation must repair everything it encounters. An incarnation can participate, contribute, receive, alter, and leave unfinished processes behind. The larger movement of consciousness does not depend upon one human personality successfully resolving every ancestral contradiction within a few decades. What matters is not completion, but the quality of participation. What becomes more conscious because you were here? What becomes more available because you lived it? And what you no longer transmit simply because you learned another way? This also gives a different meaning to resonances that seem to come from somewhere beyond the immediate family. Perhaps someone carries a profound familiarity with ways of thinking, creating, relating, or perceiving that their present environment never taught them. Within a multi-lineage understanding of Oversoul, such resonance can be held as a possibility without being converted into biography. You do not need to know exactly where a quality came from before you are allowed to develop it. The more important question is what that resonance becomes when expressed through the life you actually have. Because whatever consciousness may have known elsewhere must still pass through here. It must pass through this body, this language, this historical moment, this family, these limitations, these opportunities, and these relationships with people who possess their own trajectories. If a wider consciousness carries something into incarnation, embodiment does not merely provide a temporary container for it. Embodiment changes how the quality can exist. Compassion expressed by someone who has never encountered disagreement is not identical to compassion developed while remaining connected to people whose worldview repeatedly challenges their own. This may be one of the deeper purposes of contrast. Consciousness does not merely display what it already contains. Through relationship, what it contains acquires specificity. Patience becomes different after there has been someone difficult to remain patient with. Forgiveness becomes different when forgiveness must coexist with boundaries. Individuality becomes different when it has survived both the temptation to conform and the temptation to define itself entirely through rejection. Then even the phrase, my people, begins to change. At first, people often use it to mean those who finally understand them, the friends, communities, partners, or spiritual companions whose presence feels like relief after years of translating themselves. There is genuine medicine in finding such relationships, and nobody needs to remain surrounded only by contrast in order to prove their maturity. Resonance matters, being known matters, and there are forms of growth that become possible only when a person experiences the ease of not having to defend or explain their basic orientation. But finding resonance elsewhere does not necessarily prove that the people you came through were never your people. Human belonging can have more than one architecture. Some people belong to you through similarity, some through history, some through responsibility, some through shared becoming, some through love that survives profound difference, and some only through the fact that your lives touch deeply enough to change one another. Not every relationship must be preserved, and biological connection does not override safety or consent. Yet belonging itself becomes larger when it is no longer required to mean you reflect me accurately. That larger belonging is difficult because it removes one of the easiest ways the self confirms itself. If you can belong among people who are not organized like you, then difference no longer automatically threatens identity. You do not need to make them secretly similar, spiritually less developed, mistaken about everything important, or temporary figures you will eventually outgrow. You can allow their reality to remain intact beside yours. And when two realities can remain distinct without either requiring the disappearance of the other, relationship becomes something more sophisticated than agreement. This is where the original wound of mismatch can begin revealing an unexpected capacity. The person who spent years asking why they were born among people who did not reflect them may eventually become unusually capable of meeting difference without demanding conversion. They know what it costs to be interpreted only through someone else's expectations. If they become conscious of that history rather than merely reacting against it, they may become less willing to impose the same demand upon others. The absence of early reflection can then mature into something greater than self recognition, the ability to recognize another consciousness without needing that consciousness to resemble the self. And this begins to suggest that lineage may be doing more than transmitting qualities or arranging contrast. It may also be one of the earliest places where consciousness learns the difference between unity and sameness. A family can share blood while containing radically different interior worlds, just as a larger field of consciousness can contain expressions that do not think, feel, choose, or develop identically. If unity required sameness, difference would always represent failure. But if unity can contain genuine distinction, then the family that never completely reflected you may have been placing you inside that mystery long before you had language for what you were learning. And this distinction between unity and sameness reaches much further than family. If consciousness is genuinely capable of expressing through difference, then unity cannot mean the gradual elimination of everything distinct until only one acceptable expression remains. Unity would have to be spacious enough for difference to remain real within it. The person who thinks differently, loves differently, questions differently, creates differently, or organizes meaning differently does not have to surrender those distinctions in order to participate in something shared. The deeper coherence is not that every expression becomes identical, but that distinction no longer requires separation. A human lineage provides an unusually intimate place to learn this because family gives difference consequences. It is easier to celebrate diversity as an idea than to live beside someone whose choices unsettle your expectations, whose beliefs challenge your assumptions, or whose way of being makes visible possibilities you never intended to consider. Family brings these differences close enough that they can remain philosophical. They sit across the table, call on the phone, remember your childhood, misunderstand your decisions, help you when you are struggling, irritate you in familiar ways, and sometimes love you through languages you would never have chosen for yourself. Difference becomes embodied in people whose humanity cannot be reduced to the position they occupy in your story. This is why someone can spend years believing that their family does not understand them and eventually discover that they did not fully understand their family either. When you are the one who feels different, attention naturally gathers around the pain of not being recognized. You notice every assumption made about you, every expectation that does not fit, every conversation in which your interior reality disappears beneath someone else's interpretation. Those experiences are real, but they can make it difficult to notice that the people around you also possess interior worlds that exceed the roles you assign them. The parent who could not understand your path was not only the parent who could not understand your path, they were also a consciousness carrying their own history, fears, inherited structures, unrealized possibilities, and attempts at belonging. Recognition without superiority therefore eventually moves in both directions. It begins when you recognize yourself without requiring the lineage to validate what you see, but it matures when you become capable of recognizing the lineage without requiring it to become like you. This does not mean agreeing with everything your family believes or reopening relationships that cannot be held safely. It means allowing other people to be more than the function they performed in your development. The moment they cease being merely obstacles, teachers, mirrors, wounds, or characters in your incarnation plan, they recover the complexity that you have always wanted others to grant you. There is humility in realizing that purposeful placement does not mean the entire environment was built around your purpose. Everyone in the room has a center. Everyone has a trajectory that cannot be fully seen from another person's position. If several consciousnesses enter the same family, their lives overlap without becoming subordinate to one another, and what serves as contrast for one person may simultaneously be nourishment, challenge, consequence, or ordinary relationship for someone else. A lineage is therefore not a curriculum designed around a single student. It is a living intersection in which many developments occur at once. This prevents spiritual interpretation from quietly recreating the self centeredness it claims to transcend. It is tempting to look backward and decide that difficult relatives were placed there to teach you lessons. Supportive relatives arrived to assist your mission, and everyone somehow occupied exactly the role acquired for your awakening. There may be meaningful agreements and resonant intersections within incarnation, but another person's existence cannot be exhausted by what their presence accomplished for you. They were not born merely so that you could become yourself. Whatever larger architecture consciousness participates in must be capable of holding their purpose with the same seriousness that it holds yours. Once this is understood, even the language of lineage assignment becomes more precise. An assignment is not necessarily a sentence handed to a consciousness declaring what it must become. It can be understood as participation in a field of conditions through which certain possibilities become available. A body offers capacities and constraints. Ancestry offers tendencies and histories. Culture provides languages, permissions, prohibitions, assumptions, and forms of meaning. Family provides relationships through which all of these become personal. None of these determines the final expression, because incarnation is not merely the execution of design. It is design entering relationship with choice. This is why two people can emerge from the same household with radically different relationships to what they inherited. They may share parents, stories, traditions, economic conditions, and even many genetic tendencies, yet the same environment does not produce the same consciousness. One child may preserve what another rejects. One may experience protection where another experiences restriction, and one may discover belonging in customs that make another feel confined. Their differences do not necessarily prove that one has understood the family correctly and the other has misunderstood it. Experience is partly created through the relationship between what is encountered and the consciousness doing the encountering. The person who has always felt misplaced can find relief here because they no longer have to solve the mismatch by proving that placement was wrong. Something can belong to your path without resembling your nature. You can be born into an environment whose dominant patterns you will never reproduce and still have a meaningful relationship with having entered it. The family does not have to secretly contain another version of you before your presence makes sense. Sometimes what became possible because they did not reflect you is precisely what could not have developed through constant confirmation. Consider how much of identity remains invisible until it meets resistance. A value that has never been challenged can feel indistinguishable from preference. A boundary that has never been crossed has never needed to become articulate. A conviction surrounded only by agreement may never reveal whether it is deeply held or simply environmentally reinforced. Contrast brings these hidden structures into experience, not because conflict is inherently superior to harmony, but because difference asks consciousness to locate itself deliberately. Yet the mature response to that discovery is not endless opposition. Once a quality has become distinct, it does not need the contrasting environment forever in order to remain real. You do not need people to keep misunderstanding you so that you can keep proving you understand yourself. You do not need a family member to remain unchanged so that your transformation continues to have meaning. Eventually, the identity forged through contrast must become capable of existing without contrast as its fuel, or rebellion simply becomes another form of dependence. This is often the quieter threshold people encounter later in their development. They have learned to say no, leave rooms, question inherited assumptions, establish boundaries, find communities of resonance, and name themselves in ways their younger self could not. Those achievements matter. But then another question appears. Who are you when there is nothing left to fight? If your difference has become stable enough that nobody needs to lose for it to survive, the energy once spent resisting the lineage can become available for living. What began as differentiation can mature into authorship. Authorship means you are no longer merely editing what was handed to you. You begin creating patterns whose origin cannot be explained only through acceptance or refusal of the past. You cook some of the foods your family taught you and invent others. You retain certain forms of loyalty while changing what loyalty is allowed to demand. You carry a grandmother's humor, a father's persistence, a mother's attentiveness, an ancestor's survival instinct, and something unmistakably your own that none of them would have predicted. The resulting life is neither repetition nor rejection. It is lineage becoming capable of another arrangement. This is where the idea of multi-lineage resonance becomes especially meaningful without needing to become extraordinary. If the Oversoul has participated in more than one stream of experience, what emerges through you may indeed exceed what this particular ancestry can explain. But whatever enters through that wider history is now meeting this lineage, not bypassing it. The unfamiliar quality becomes embodied through inherited biology, spoken through a human language, shaped by contemporary circumstances, and tested through actual relationships. The wider consciousness does not erase the local inheritance. The two meet in the person living now. Perhaps this is why the desire to identify exactly where every resonance originated can sometimes distract from what the resonance is becoming. A person may spend years asking whether a powerful inner familiarity proves another incarnation, another civilization, another world, or another line of oversoul expression. Those possibilities can be contemplated without contempt, but origin is not always the most fruitful question. A seed can be studied endlessly for where it came from, while the living question is what it grows into after entering the soil. Whatever you carried here becomes part of Earth history once you live it here. That changes the emotional meaning of being the strange one in the family. You are not necessarily evidence that you were delivered to the wrong address. You may be evidence that belonging was never meant to be measured by how perfectly an environment explains everything within you. Your lineage can be genuinely yours while remaining unable to account for all that you are. Just as you can love a person without possessing the complete explanation for their consciousness, you can belong to a lineage without reducing yourself to the range of expression that lineage has previously displayed. And there may be grief in accepting this. Some people have spent years waiting for the moment their family finally sees them in exactly the way they have wanted to be seen. They imagine the right explanation, the right achievement, the right spiritual vocabulary, or enough personal transformation will eventually produce recognition from people who have never possessed the framework through which that recognition could occur. Sometimes greater understanding does arrive, and relationships change beautifully. Sometimes it does not. And adulthood includes learning that belonging cannot remain dependent upon receiving every form of recognition that childhood needed. That grief is not failure. It is often the point where fantasy releases the actual relationship. You stop relating only to the parent you hope will someday appear and begin seeing the person who is actually there. You stop asking siblings to become witnesses they may not know how to become. You stop postponing your own legitimacy until everyone agrees with your interpretation of yourself. Then something unexpectedly tender can become possible. You may discover forms of relationship that were hidden beneath the demand for a kind of sameness neither side could provide. Perhaps your father never understands your spiritual life, but never misses the chance to repair something in your home. Perhaps your mother cannot follow the questions that occupy your mind, but remembers exactly how you take your coffee when you visit. Perhaps a sibling thinks your worldview is strange and still answers the phone when your life falls apart. None of these gestures erase deeper conflicts, and practical care should never be used to excuse harm. But recognition becomes more accurate when you stop measuring every form of love against the one language you most wished another person could speak. Then the language that did not feel like you begins to look different without needing to become different. Its limitations remain visible. Its gifts become visible too, including gifts you may have overlooked because they arrived in forms that did not resemble your own values. You can receive what is genuinely nourishing without pretending everything was nourishing, refusing what should end without declaring everything worthless, and introduce what was missing without imagining that you invented goodness itself. This is what it means to belong without surrendering discernment. And perhaps this is one of the quiet maturities incarnation asks of consciousness: to stop confusing love with resemblance, purpose with comfort, difference with hierarchy, and belonging with conformity. You can come through a people without becoming a copy of them. You can carry them forward without carrying everything forward. You can become something they could not have predicted while still acknowledging that the ground beneath your feet includes what they lived, what they survived, what they failed to resolve, what they gave freely, and what they could not give at all. So when you look at the family culture, ancestry, body, or environment that has sometimes felt unlike you, the question does not have to remain, why don't these people reflect me? There is another question beneath it, quieter and more demanding. What became possible because they didn't? And even that question may eventually open into something larger. Because once you understand that contrast helped make your difference visible, you can begin asking what your difference is now making possible within the lineage that received you. That is where the story stops being only about why you came through them and begins revealing what can come through you.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.